Hello and welcome to this instructional Anaplan video brought to you by BI. Today we're going to talk about dynamic cell access. Dynamic cell access in Anaplan is a very powerful tool that allows you to control the read and write user access to specific line items. It can control the access based on different dimensions and with different granularity. You can create very complex rules and apply them to any line item, thus tailoring them to your specific needs. In order to create dynamic cell access for a specific line item, you need the so-called access drivers. Those are Boolean line items that are needed in order to control the read and write access. There are three different states that could be applied to any line item. Those are the read, write, and invisible. In the table below, you can see how the two access drivers, the write and the read access driver, could be combined in order to create different states. The write access driver has the highest priority, which means that if it is true, then regardless of whether or not there is a read access driver or regardless of its state, then users will be able to edit that line item. If, for example, the write access driver is set to false, then we need to have the read access driver set to true in order for this line item to be visible and read-only for the user. If the read access driver is set to false, or if it's not set at all, then that specific cell is going to be invisible, which means that the data in it is still going to be there, but the users will not be able to see it. Now let's switch to Anaplan and see a couple of examples to understand how dynamic cell access works. We're going to start with a simple example. In our module here, we have the units sold of specific products. The module has several dimensions: time, the customer's list, and hierarchical product lists with two levels: the products themselves and whether they're alcoholic or not. Currently, all the data for the months between January and June is set to write, and the data in the rest of the months to read only. We can control that from the module at the top. By deselecting the line item manual write for May, for example, we can see that in the table below, all the data for May is now set to read only. If we'd like to be able to edit the data for July, for example, we can select this line item for July, and you can see that we can immediately edit these cells. Now let's understand how dynamic cell access works in this case. The line items in the module above are the write access driver and the read access driver. The write access driver is set to be a manual input, and the read access driver has a formula that sets it to the opposite state of the write driver. Essentially, if you would like to write in a cell, then the write access driver is going to be true and the read access driver false, and vice versa. In order to link our access driver line items with the module below, we have two major steps. Firstly, they should have at least one overlapping dimension. In this case, it's the time dimension. Secondly, we should set the specific Boolean line item, manual write, to be our write access driver, and the Boolean line item, manual read, to be our read access driver. Let's see how to do that. We're going to go to our module and then open the blueprint mode. When we scroll to the right, we're going to see these two columns, read access driver and write access driver. From here you can select the appropriate Boolean line items. When you click here, you can see all the Boolean line items in your model. This is why it is preferred that your dynamic cell access drivers are set in a dedicated module or modules where you can easily access them. Here you can see that we have already set this line item to be our write access driver and this one, manual read, to be the read access driver. We have one more line item, this one, in which we have set only a write access driver. If you remember from our table, if we have only a write access driver and it's set to true, then the data is going to be editable. But when it's set to false and there is no read access driver set, the data is going to be invisible. If we go to that line item, we can see that this is exactly the case. When the write access driver is set to true, the data is visible and editable. However, if it's set to false, the data becomes invisible. Now let's look at a more complex example where combinations of different Boolean line items could be intertwined in order to tailor the dynamic cell access to your specific needs. Currently, I have access to all the data for the months between January and July. I can change that, but we have already seen how this works. However, let's say that I should be able to edit the data for some customers only, and that the rest of the data for the other customers should be read-only. I have created this line item, which has the customers list as its dimension. Let's say, for example, that customer 1's data should be read-only for me. I can deselect this tick box, and as you can see, all the data for this customer is now in black, which means that it cannot be edited. This is not the case for the other customers. This is because this line item here is set to true for all of them except for customer 1. Let's also say that I should be able to edit the data for specific products only. For that purpose, I have created this line item that has the lowest level of granularity of the products list as its dimension. I can select or deselect products, and based on that, I will either have write or read-only access to the specific products. This level of granularity might be very useful, especially when you don't have many products. However, if you have a large list with many product groups and a large number of items in them, this might become a bit more difficult. For that purpose, I've created another Boolean line item which has a higher level of granularity of the product's hierarchy, namely the division alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks. For the purpose of our example, I'm just going to deselect all of these Boolean line items, and I'm going to show you how to switch between the two hierarchical levels. I've created a line item that allows me to choose the level of granularity for my dynamic cell access. The lower one, which is the product level, if this tick box is not selected. If it is selected, you can see that this line item is grayed out, and this one can be edited. Now I can choose whether I would like to have read or write access to the alcoholic, to the non-alcoholic, or to both of the product groups. It cannot be seen in these line items, but I have added the users list as their dimension as well, which means that I could select a user from this drop-down. Let's say I choose this user, and I can choose which customers, which products, or which time periods they should be able to see or edit. For each user, we can select different combinations of our tick boxes, and these are not going to interfere between users. We cannot see this in my module view, however, we have changed the view of this user. It's very important to remember that you should have all of the line items and modules related to your dynamic cell access in a dedicated administrator dashboard where your users cannot access it. Final remark about this example is that all line items can have only one read and one write access driver. In this example, we have many Boolean line items. However, they are all interconnected with formulas that are taken into account by our, in this case, hidden read and write access drivers for this line item here. We're not going to go into technical details about how this example works, but it serves to show how dynamic cell access is customizable and can become very complex. In conclusion, dynamic cell access is a very powerful tool in Anaplan that allows flexible control over the state of different cells in your model. Dynamic cell access could be applied to different dimensions, different granularities, and importantly, to different users. If you'd like to learn more about dynamic cell axes, you can visit Anaplan's Anapedia. Thank you very much for your attention and have a great day. If you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to give thumbs up and subscribe to our channel.